Just listened to an audio recording of Edgar Allan Poe's The Masque of Red Death, or The Masque of the Red Death, which I never actually read before, surprisingly. It's about this horrible plague called the Red Death that's has horrible symptoms. Like, I don't know if I'll go into the graphic details, like sweating blood, dizziness, affects this entire town. And Prince Prospero, however, even though he's a very obviously an important, powerful figure, completely ignores this plague and decides, I'm just gonna spend the night reveling with the fellow noblemen and playing music and ignoring it, and not basically not taking responsibility for my own country. And what's interesting is that each different room within that place where the music and everything is being performed and everybody's enjoying themselves, each room has its own sort of distinct color that represents the different stages of life leading up until death. Red, orange, violet, eventually leading to black. Black being the final room that is described in the story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So before they get to the black room, the Red Death himself shows up, showing that he's indefeatable, that he is basically the embodiment, the personification of the plague itself. He wears this sort of corpse-like mask. He has blood all over his attire. This mysterious masked figure shows up, and the prince, not knowing that he's a supernatural being or an apparition, just thinks that he's there to either scare them or make a mockery of them. Or, obviously it pricks at his sort of guilty conscience, reminding him that he hasn't addressed the plague that has been destroying the entire country. And so he gets his noblemen to try to chase the Red Death out of there, but eventually, as they're all like running after him to get this basically powerful apparition out of his kingdom, when they get to the black room at the end, the Red Death turns around once more, and then the prince is dead. The moment he looks at him again, and the Red Death pretty much kills everybody in that kingdom. As this kind of revenge, but also to show that they cannot. Ultimately, the nobility cannot escape mortality, obviously. But I think this kind of ties into some of the things that I've been discussing. As I've discussed, that my entire book series, The Fall of John Roe, is what it's called. And John Roe is this debauched nobleman who didn't believe in an afterlife, and was also perverted, really frightening, really violent, really scary guy who kidnaps this child prodigy named Edmund, and his horrible, violent legacy ends up being carried like all the way from the 12th century all the way till year 2400, where there's this sort of futuristic society, this sort of dystopia in the United States, where this group of intellectuals called Griffith Alliance follow in John Roe's footsteps. Right. But I think what the similarities are is that, in addition to not believing in an afterlife, right, John Roe therefore perhaps becomes complacent. He doesn't really quite fully understand the power and the mystery of death, its real nature, and he sees his current life, or just human life, as being like merely almost like the way that an animal would be, or like a pig waiting for slaughter, right? One day they're going to die, but everything just boils down to pain and pleasure. That's what your entire biology, your entire existence is comprised of. That there is no sort of higher principle kind of controlling anything, basically you're going to die soon. You're going to die one day, and you just may as well live it up. like what the prince is doing in the Red Death, just reveling with his friends, right? And I think this sort of mentality, I think, is probably the most prominent in my book series. Like, and that is really the thing that governs most of the problems in the entire book series. Like, if this were eliminated, perhaps this entire legacy would not have gotten started, including even sexuality as well. Sexuality being used really as a weapon, and people basically seeing themselves as like pigs just waiting for slaughter, and in terms of their own relationship with death. So they, in John Rowe's case, he doesn't really fully understand all of the implications of death, because obviously he's really quite narrow-minded and doesn't understand really, maybe the other spiritual or otherworldly kinds of aspects of the universe, right? That's something he's completely shut off. Um, but I think also, um, this ties into a mentality. I think that there was a sort of this rift, cultural rift, for many years. I remember learning about it in the Rising Tide Foundation between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, or the Guelphs were more like the mentality of John Rowe, right? The sort of devil may care, basically having that same sort of belief about human nature and human beings in general, right? And this actually affecting even the quality of the art world nowadays. I mean, this ties into what is something that I mentioned in, Julie James Davis is the name of this uh, woman who has a channel called The War on Beauty, where she talks about, the degeneration of beauty in art, and that being a result, perhaps, of that sort of mentality, and the art losing its logic and its sort of consistency, and there being kind of almost a sense of meaninglessness and a sense of chaos to it. But I think what the Red Death does is that it actually takes that chaos, but encapsulates it and communicates it into something that we can all understand, right? And I think that is really what the most interesting thing about it is.